Hello everybody and welcome back to the Halo Chronicle. Today's video is going to be another installment in my Halo short story series that will detail the events of the human-Forerunner war. What if I told you that the version of humanity we see in the Halo games is not the first? In fact, humanity has actually existed in the Milky Way for millions of years. One iteration of humanity would advance to become the second most powerful fighting force in the galaxy. They would have access to technology that would rival the Forerunners themselves. This iteration of humanity existed 120,000 years before the events of Halo combat evolved, and is referred to as ancient humanity. Ancient humanity would make a series of mistakes that would lead to their near total destruction. Their species would be forcefully reduced back to cavemen-like creatures as a punishment they never deserved. Today we will discuss the events that led to this outcome, as well as a horrible war on two fronts. Let's jump into it. Ancient humanity was a spacefaring race that would expand across the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy and establish outposts. Initially, their technology would be limited, but that would change when they would come across a peaceful species called the Sanchayum. The Sanchayum are a species that still exist in some forms in the modern Halo universe, but they are referred to as the Prophets. The Sanchayum were a very technologically advanced species, but their peaceful nature left them vulnerable to attacks. Ancient humanity would ally themselves with the Sanchayum. They would act as a military force for the Sanchayum and protect their new allies. In exchange, the Sanchayum would help grow ancient humanity's technology. This alliance would become known as the Human-Sanchayum Alliance. Together, this alliance would become a powerhouse. Both the humans and the Sanchayum would worship an ancient, long-since past species called the Precursors. They would spend time researching precursor relics as well as the mysterious structures they left behind. Through their research, humanity would come to the conclusion that they were supposed to inherit an ancient responsibility from the Precursors, but another, far more advanced species called the Forerunners would steal this birthright before it could be passed to them. This created a lot of resentment between ancient humanity and the Forerunners, but it would not initially lead to a war. Ancient humanity's worship of the Precursors led them to establish their capital on a planet rich in Precursor artifacts. This world would be known as Cherom HaKor. Though both humanity and the Sanchayum knew little about Precursor technology, they would use it as a foundation for their own. The Human-Sanchayum Alliance would be famous for using Precursor structures to establish fortifications and defenses. This would make Cherom HaKor one of the most well-defended planets in the galaxy. During ancient humanity's expansion across the Orion arm of the Milky Way, they would come in contact with several automated ships of an unknown origin. These automated ships would contain glass jars filled with a mysterious powder. Humanity would study this powder for quite some time and determine that it was made up of short-chain molecules that were thought to be harmless. To learn more about the powder and its effects, humanity began exposing it to animals. One such animal would be a pet species called the Feru. This would not just be one of the biggest mistakes in human history, it would be one of the biggest mistakes ever made by any species in the Milky Way. The Feru were seen as pets for both humanity and the Sanchayum. After prolonged exposure to the powder, humanity found that it instilled desired domesticated behavior in the Feru. It made them more docile. The results of this study would become public and would result in the creation of a large black market surrounding the powder. The black market would grow outside of the control of the ancient human government. Humanity didn't realize it, but the Feru's prolonged exposure to the powder would begin to mutate their DNA on a genetic level. After centuries of use, these mutations would cause physical and psychological changes to the Feru. The Feru would develop growths and tendrils. Feru who didn't have these growths were compelled to eat the growths of the Feru that did. This is particularly disturbing as the Feru were originally herbivores. These growths and tendrils would begin to spread like a virus throughout large populations of the Feru. Both ancient humans and the Sanchayum were forced to kill their pets to try to stem the spread of this infection, but it was too late. The infection would begin to spread across species. This was made easier by the Sanchayum. Some wealthy Sanchayum would eat the Feru as a delicacy. Both humans and the Sanchayum would begin to become infected. The infection spread so quickly that ancient humans were forced to flee their planets entirely. The quick nature of the spreading infection led the humans in the Sanchayum to refer to it as the Flood. The ancient human leadership would make the difficult decision to order their military to perform orbital bombardments on planets that contained infected humans and Sanchayum, but even that wasn't enough to stem the spread of the Flood. Ancient humans and Sanchayum were forced to flee planets that were in the path of the Flood. They would be forced to resettle entire populations. The Flood's advance through human territory would force humanity to seek refuge in other territories throughout space. One territory that ancient humanity would begin to expand into would be controlled by the Forerunners. To their surprise, ancient humanity would find that the Flood had already begun spreading into Forerunner territory. Desperate to stem the tide of the infection, ancient human leaders would order their military forces to bombard Forerunner-controlled planets. Initially, it was thought that ancient humanity did not warn the Forerunners about the Flood, but in more recent lore, we have come to find that that wasn't necessarily true. Ancient humanity did try to warn the Forerunners about the Flood's advance into their territory, but the Forerunners chose to ignore them. The Forerunners believed that the Flood wasn't real and that it was an excuse for humanity to encroach on their territory. This opinion would ultimately lead to a brutal conflict called the Human-Forerunner War. Ancient humanity was now stuck in the middle of a war on two fronts. On one side, the Flood was spreading and advancing through their territory with reckless abandon. On the other side, the Forerunners would begin to violently respond to humanity's incursions into their territory. Due to humanity's lengthy battle with the Flood, they were severely weakened and not ready to take on the Forerunners. This led to many early Forerunner victories, and ancient humanity would be pushed back to the core worlds of their empire. As the Forerunners attempted to push into the core worlds of humanity's empire, something strange would begin to happen. Humanity's strength redoubled. They fought back with a strength not seen before. This was because as the Forerunners moved in, the Flood began to recede. The reason the Flood began to withdraw was unknown at the time. The Forerunners would later come to the conclusion that humanity had found some sort of cure or immunity to the Flood. The Forerunners' push into humanity's core worlds would slow to a crawl. The leader of the Forerunner military was a brilliant strategist named the Didact. The Didact would use a star-hopping strategy to finally advance further into human-controlled space. This star-hopping strategy would see the Didact move large Forerunner structures called shield worlds into human-controlled space. These shield worlds would be sent to places of strategical importance. These shield worlds would contain significant amounts of Forerunner warriors and would provide them with cover as they pushed further into human territory. The Forerunners would ignore human worlds that didn't pose a threat. This strategy was hugely successful. Using this strategy, the Forerunners would push humanity back to their capital world, Jerome Hakor. A 50-year-long siege would begin. Using their advanced technology and the precursor foundations of Jerome Hakor, ancient humanity would mount a fierce defense of their capital. This defense would bring the war to a stalemate. The Forerunners sieged the planet for over 50 years but were not able to break through. During this siege, all of the Didact's children who also served in his military would unfortunately die. This created a high level of desperation in the Forerunners to end the war. To break the siege, the Forerunners would be forced to use underhanded tactics. They would reach out to humanity's allies, the Sanchayum. The Forerunners would offer the Sanchayum leniency in exchange for betraying humanity. This was an offer the Sanchayum would accept. The Sanchayum would create an opening in the human defense that the Forerunners would exploit. Within hours, the Forerunners would break the siege and capture Jerome Hakor. The leader of ancient humanity's military, Forthencho, the Lord of Admirals, would be forced to surrender to the Didact. During the latter half of the war, the Forerunners would learn that humanity's warning about the flood was true. The Didact's forces would find human populations living in flood-infested systems unmolested. This gave more credibility to the idea that humanity had found a cure. The Didact ordered his forces to capture flood specimens for study. He had the leader of the Forerunner life workers, his wife, the librarian, study the flood. Through this research, the Forerunners would find that the flood was so contagious and virulent that it could quickly overwhelm the galaxy within just a few hundred years. With the threat of the flood now properly gauged, the Didact would order his forces to find and destroy any pockets of the infection that still lingered in the galaxy, but they were too late. It was believed that several flood-infested ships had escaped and fled the Milky Way entirely. This meant that the flood could and likely would one day return. The Forerunners became desperate to find the secrets of humanity's supposed cure. This desperation would have an enormous impact on humanity's punishment. The debate on how to punish the humans for the war would dominate the Forerunner political theater. Many different Forerunner factions would suggest many different punishments. Chief among them was the Builder clan. The Builders believed that humanity should be exterminated to eliminate the possible threat of them rising up again. The Life Workers fiercely opposed this opinion. They believed that humanity was acting in the best interest of the galaxy and should be given leniency. The Warrior Servants opposed the idea that humanity was acting in the best interest of the galaxy because it was not their duty to do so. The Warrior Servants believed that the duty to protect the galaxy solely rested with the Forerunners. In the end, a horrible bargain was struck. Humanity would not be exterminated, but they would be reduced in a horrific way. The punishment was twofold. The human leadership at Jerome Hakor who refused to divulge the secrets of the flood cure would be subjected to a device called the Composer. Their essences or knowledge, patterns, and memories would be forcefully removed from their physical bodies and digitally stored. These essences would then be subjected to rope interrogation until the secrets of the flood cure were found. The Forerunners would never get the cure through this method. The second part of their punishment would see the Forerunners take intact human populations back to the human homeworld, Erde Tyrene, aka Earth. Before returning to Earth, the Forerunners would reduce the genetic advancement of these humans. These humans would go from an advanced, spacefaring species back to a caveman-like species. Both punishments were equally cruel. It has recently been discovered that not all ancient humans were captured by the Forerunners at the end of the war. Some escaped and fled to a far-off corner of the galaxy that even the Forerunners feared to tread. What happened to these ancient humans is still a mystery, but recent Halo books have indicated that we may be about to see a resurgence in ancient human lore. Only time will tell. For their cooperation at the end of the war, the Sanchayum were given leniency. They were confined to 3 planets in their home system. Their weapons and means of defense would be stripped from them, and they would be kept under strict surveillance by the Forerunners. After many attempts to discover the secrets of humanity's cure for the flood failed, the Forerunners would be forced to make other plans for the eventual return of the flood, but that is a story for another time. This is going to complete today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more content. If you have any ideas for Halo short stories you would like to see in the future, please leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.